Hello, welcome to Merixstudio's webinar about healthy mobile application growth. I'm Aleksandra and I'll be your host today. Joining me are Aydin and Jakub from Merixstudio. Hi guys.
Hi.
Hi.
Our goal for today is to guide you through the challenges, risks and opportunities of scaling a mobile application from a developer's and a designer's perspective. But before we move on, I think it's time for introductions. So guys, could you tell us a few words about who you are, what you do, and about your experience with mobile app development and design in general? Aydin, could you begin?
Sure. I'm a senior mobile developer at Merixstudio. Currently working with Flutter, doing some cross-platform mobile applications. Prior to that, I worked on backend as a backend software engineer. Also did some team leading at some point. Worked on various projects, big ones, small ones, microservices, monolith apps, APIs, whole bunch of different things. Generally, I work as a software developer for 8+ years, almost five of it with Merixstudio. Happy to be here.
Okay. Thank you. Cool.
So I'm a product design manager here at Merixstudio. Prior to that, I was a team leader and UI designer. And before that, I worked as a UX/UI designer in different companies before Merixstudio. As a designer, I worked for 12+ years on multiple different projects, most of them actually mobile, on different stages of development, including scaleup, which we will be focusing on today.
Thank you guys for the introductions. I'm really excited to have you here, so thank you for accepting my invitation. As I said, today's topic are mobile scale-up challenges, but before our audience faces them, they need to build a mobile application in the first place. And for many, this begins with an MVP that's functional yet somehow truncated, and there are numerous limitations, be it in the team count or budget and so on. And with that being said, I'd like to first ask you, do you think it's even possible to lay grounds for future scalability from your point of view?
Sure, so the process starts usually from design, so maybe let's start from this. If you want your mobile to be scalable in the future, I think you should put in your priorities or let's say design principles, two things. It's consistency and modularity. Consistency means that every element of the interface is uniform and behaves and looks similarly across the app, so that you create this sense of familiarity and control for the user, and because of that they can feel comfortable using the app, whatever they are doing, wherever they are. And the second thing is modularity, which is based on the atomic design methodology, which basically means that the app, all the screens are breaked into smaller pieces, sections and modules, or even atoms. And because of having those bricks, we can reuse them in the whole application. We can add them, remove them with ease, with little or no customization. To accomplish that, we also work with documentations. We create style guides, we work with design systems and so on. But those I think we will be discussing a little bit later today.
Yeah, definitely, because there is so much to talk about in this case. Yeah.
Maybe I can add a few more things from the technical perspective. Of course, we acknowledge that MVPs have a bunch of limitations about time, budget, human resources, nerves sometimes. But as a developer, you can, of course, put some kind of fundamental things into it. Like you can already start with the supporting multiple languages, currencies, different time zones, different time formats. You can already include them in the system, so you don't need to add them later after the MVP, which can be quite a headache. Also, I recommend having a mobile-first approach whenever you develop something or even design something. So this is because mobile applications have a bunch of whole different set of limitations and possibilities, like different resources that you use. So you have to deal with a different set of problems in order to achieve this kind of mobile applications, which is different than a simple website in this case. So I recommend dealing with those problems before you deal with, let's say, before the MVP, so that you will save up valuable development time. Also, you can already more or less know what kind of platforms you support. Are you really planning to support mobile applications, or if you support which ones. Are you supporting iOS and Android or vice versa, or are you supporting Linux apps or whatever you want to support? You have to decide in this first phase. That also leads to the roadmap, basically having a roadmap. So if you already have a more or less a roadmap and you can base a bunch of assumptions to it, it's very useful for developers. Also, I think for designers as well, it's very useful. So that we can have more accurate assumptions. We can use this as a guide. We can craft better systems right from the beginning.
Mm-hmm. And how about the tech backbone? Because if you browse scalability, then you'll probably find loads of content about, bulletproof tech stack, languages, libraries, and so on. Is this really a thing from your perspective?
So about the technical backbone, of course, in my opinion, it should come from after the design phase. So you more or less know what kind of tech stack or infrastructure you will need for this system. Also CI/CD pipelines and test plans according to what kind of tech stack that you want to have in this case. Also, you can more or less decide what kind of third parties that you want to include or services you want to include in your system right at the beginning. I recommend spending additional time in this, make additional research in order to find a much better fit, because if you already have more or less a plan how the system will develop over time and you find a better fit in terms of tech stack or let's say third parties, you will save a bunch of technical debt in this case in the later periods of this project. Afterwards, you go on with creating a navigation map. You think about an architecture and maybe add error reporting tools, and that's pretty much how it works.
So it all makes sense, and I'm glad that you mentioned reporting tools, because that's also quite a crucial thing, right? Starting tracking things that are going well and the things that are not going so well and that you should focus on in the later phases. Could you tell us a bit more about these? I mean, the ones that you enjoy using, or maybe the ones that our audience should use if they want to keep their mobile application healthy?
In my opinion, it's going to be wrong to recommend one brand or the other. These tools are quite different from each other, and they offer different services, different features, and so on. You just need to gather a list of needs that you need basically. Gather your needs and check if those needs are matching whatever this error reporting tool is providing. In my case, in my development journey, I used mainly two tools. One is Sentry. I used it mainly for backend projects because of its easiness to integrate, ability to manage issues, manage your teams. So if you work on multiple people development themes, you can somehow manage this easily. Otherwise, you don't know who takes care of what, who is taking care of which bug, and so on. So it gets kind of lost. About mobile projects, I used Crashlytics, which is actually from Google. And for mobile projects, because I'm a Flutter developer, so I use Google services heavily, including Firebase. And Crashlytics is basically a service of Firebase. So it's very easy to integrate because you more or less heavily, or almost all projects, you use Firebase services. And you just include one thing, use also Crashlytics or cloud messaging, whatever you need, and it's very, how to say, small footprint. It leaves a small footprint in your system.
And how about the design tools in this case?
I absolutely agree that you need to use analytics tools in your app if you want to adapt a product-oriented approach. It's crucial to introduce analytics from day one, basically. And they give you a lot of insights, not only about crashes and errors, like Aydin said, but also the information about where the users basically abandon the app, what are their issues, what takes them too much time, and so on. So you can measure a lot of things that can basically be a base for your scale-up or any other investment for that matter. So look for the pain points, look for the blockers, things like that. But introduce those analytics as soon as possible so that you can draw conclusions as soon as possible, basically.
And not regret it later, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So say we follow your advice and we try to future-proof the mobile application. I feel that jumping straight into the scale-up phase sounds almost too easy because from our experience we know that most successful projects start with the thorough discovery and the analysis of the as-is state because this gives us greater insight into what we're dealing with. So from your perspective, what things should we try to analyze to make sure that we are ready for scale-up?
So let's start with this. If you want, before any scaling, going straight away into investment and so on, make sure that you have a good reason for it, right? And I think the best way to recognize the moment when you need to scale your app or to invest in any way is to listen to your users. And you can do it both actively and passively. By passively, I mean just give them an option to send you a feedback or see what are the reviews in App Store on Google Play, right? But if you want to do it more actively, then conduct user research. And there are many techniques how you can do this, but basically using those observation techniques and feedback methodologies, you can gather the information, what are the, like we said before, pain points or blockers or habits, needs that they are driving the users, right? And the type of the research you will conduct is based on the type of the product you have, the budget, timeline, target audience, and even environment that they are using the app. The other tool that can bring you closer to the healthy scale-up is UX audit. That helps you to avoid legacy issues before introducing new features, helps you to find out what are the quick wins and even cheap improvements that you can do for your app. What's cool about UX audit is that it's not necessarily expensive process, so it's cheap to conduct and can give you a lot of good insights what to do next.
Okay.
Maybe I can also add a few things to it. Basically everybody wants their product to grow and scale up. That's quite natural. But from the developer's perspective, you also need to pay attention what kind of technical problems you will be facing during this process. So you need to also gather some data about what can potentially happen in the background in the system. So how do you gather this information is also very similar to these analytic tools or UX audit. Is just on the code or on the internal part. So you gather data from analytics and error reporting tools like existing issues. You check the backlog for existing bugs that you just didn't resolve. You can also take a look at the user reviews in the market or that things you get from the support to the support emails. Also, you can conduct some kind of code audit for the existing status of the application or the API, just to understand where are we right now and what will be the cost of building on this. And once you collect all these points, all these tasks, you just categorize them. You can prioritize them, sort them, and take some action. Like what are we fixing? What's the cost of fixing them, in order to healthily move on with the project.
Okay, so from what you're saying, I guess that the key takeaway would be that it's never a one-size-fits-all, and it's you have many options, so you need to pick them carefully.
It's true. I mean, it's usually not like business decides something and it just right away magically appears. No, there are a bunch of people working on it. Not only business decision is not the only deciding factor here. And you also need to listen to cooks in this case, and they are doing this food for you.
Actually, both of you mentioned one thing, that's reviews, and I want us to discuss it in a bit more detail because I feel that it's also quite an affordable and accessible source of feedback. From my own experience, I can tell you that's how I spill my guts if I dislike something about any kind of solution. So what do you think about those?
So in practice, a lot of reviews are actually not that valuable as we would like them to be because of the plague of fake reviews and also the fact that we tend to give extremes. So your rate is very low or very high, and you rarely land in the middle. That said, like you said, it's something that is affordable. It's also passive, so you don't have to do anything to just review. Not you have to review them, right? But it takes little or no time, and analyze those, because people sometimes do give some sort of feedback, interesting ideas, or even just report the bug in the app. And this is still a user voice, so you should hear it, you should consider it, and if you see a pattern, then absolutely it's worth to explore it.
I agree on that. I mean, market reviews are for sure relative, like they are usually users' opinion. So approach it with a grain of salt, with a cold glass of water. But these are just, let's say, these are complementary to what you already gather from analytics and error reporting tools.
So it shouldn't be the only thing you rely on,
Absolutely.
definitely. Yeah. And there is one more thing I need to ask you about before we move on, and I think you saw that coming, and that's tech debt. During our modernization lives, so many people told me that it's scary, it's frustrating, and it can be very dangerous to the project. So what's its role in the mobile scale-up? What's its place in the whole landscape?
A small metaphor here. For me, technical debt is like vegetables in your plate that your parents tell you to eat, and you avoid them until the last moment. Please don't be that kiddo, and just deal with this technical debt early on, because building anything on top of a technical debt will only aggravate the existing issues. That means it will get harder and harder to fix, maintain the code. Bunch of people will not know how the system really works, so they will find workarounds. So it will get quite a messy in a very, very short time. That means your system will attract fewer and fewer users. That means less revenue for you. But in general, it's a business decision. I mean, we developers we don't really have a saying in that. So we are really relying on what a client, or in this case, product owner will say. If they say that, nope, we are carrying on with the plan, no bug fixing, no refactoring, this is basically on their heads, not their responsibility, and they are to blame, not the developer in this case.
Yeah, I mean, what else can you do if you're not told to deal with it, right?
Just they have to remember that once you carry on with that, the severity of the future problems will be much worse.
Yeah, true. So that's a good tip to remember when dealing with a mobile scale-up. Okay, I think that we've done with the preparation, and we can move on to the very core of our webinar. So with these mobile scale-up challenges. And I'd like us to discuss 3 areas. One that would be product growth, 2 performance and stability, and 3 mindset and team-related stuff. And maybe let's tackle them one by one, starting with product growth. And my first question actually would be kind of simple, but maybe tricky. So what do you understand as healthy product growth? After all, I feel that it's a big term, and it can mean different things to different people. So I'm curious, what's your take on this?
So maybe let's start with distinguishing which growth we are interested in. So we know there's vertical growth and horizontal growth. The vertical growth means that you take your service and scale it in the line of business that you are in right now. So the example could be, for example, Netflix, right? They started as a streaming service, but at one point they entered the production business and started to creating their own content. And the horizontal growth, on the other hand, means that you scale into different markets, new markets. So another example for Netflix, they started in few countries and then grew to 150 countries, I think, in 2016 or something like that. And the vertical growth is actually more traditional way for startups to grow, and we see it more often.
Okay.
From the project perspective, I agree with Kuba, and on the code you will see that if it's about horizontal growth, you will see that system will support new users, more like higher amount of users, as well as different currencies, different languages, new time zones. Maybe maybe new regions that your application is available to download. But if it's about vertical growth, it's more of a new feature that you add to the system. For example, new payment method that you support. You, for example, add Google Pay or a different payment gateway that enables users to actually attach new ways of paying your system.
So let's focus on the one that you've just discussed on vertical growth. So it's not really a rule that more features mean more troubles. However, it can be so, especially from the usability standpoint, right? Yeah. Why is that? What can go wrong with adding new features?
So, first of all, history knows many apps and services that basically got out of hand in terms of what is a good and healthy grow, right? Yeah. And we all know Facebook. And this is a great example of a service that started very simple. The idea was to build new connections and help people with that. And now it's this huge, overcomplicated service that actually people are avoiding right now, trying to avoid at least. And this increase of product requirements beyond original ones is known as feature creep. And it's something that we see all over the place, and we see that it's actually can be very expensive for the business. And I love the Uber case study that they shared a couple of years ago. Basically, they start as a transport service, operating in a growing sharing economy industry. But at one point, they grew to such extent that the map that you use in the app as a main feature was barely visible underneath the multitude of features and additional informations. And the management of Uber saw the risks of staying that way and decided that it needed to change. Their design team come up with the new look based on a custom design system that they created for the Uber brand. And their development team, as a result, had to basically create the whole product from scratch. Okay. So I imagine it was quite stressful for them.
Must have.
But yeah, and I think that what we see right now in Uber is that they still are growing, right? They have introducing us the new features like package delivery or food delivery, right? But they scale right now in more controlled manner, I think. And the lesson from here is that you should focus on some sort of simplicity and your core of your business, and be sure that every new feature that you introduce to your users is absolutely necessary and it is a value for them and not just something that can bring your revenue about 1% or something like that, right? Mm-hmm. Users, like one more thought, users, if they have a choice, will go towards the apps that give you a better user experience. And this is something that we see all over the market, so bear that in mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so even if it seems quite counterintuitive, right? Because the stakeholders want to pack the app with more and more features, thinking that it will make them more competitive, and it actually may backfire for them.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And how does it relate to roadmap? Because you mentioned it at the beginning, and I suppose that you shouldn't really stick too close to it, right?
Technically, no, because roadmap is just a prognosis of what can happen or what your application will become eventually. But it's so attractive to drop a new feature so that your users will enjoy it, and then you will get more users and revenue, etc. It's quite natural to think about it. But it's not so easy as it looks as we talk right now, because developers or designers base bunch of their assumptions like basing on that roadmap. So even though it's not set in stone, any kind of change will have cost. So that means whenever you develop as a software engineer, whenever you develop a certain part of the application, you need to find the balance. Is this architecture or should this block be flexible enough for specific future growth, or should be quite minimal only for that specific purpose? Like, you have to find a middle ground for that, so that you won't exceed the development time. And if a roadmap keeps changing, which does change, it brings additional cost, but client, or in this case product owner, should be very well aware of that additional cost that it will bring. and it should be accepted as a potential cost.
Yeah, like that's a natural thing to bear in mind with any software project, I guess. Yeah. So I get the feeling that there are quite a few things that can go wrong. For example, the thing that you mentioned, that stakeholders are not that flexible as we would like them to be. So what can we do to ensure that our mobile application, as it grows, is going in the right direction and that we are not really gilding the lily with unnecessary features?
Yeah. So back to the user research.
Okay.
Take a closer look. Where are you right now? What is the state of things? How your users are seeing your product? Where is it right now, and so on. Do the research to find their habits, their needs, and what they actually like in your app, so that you don't change it and you lose the core thing that actually keep them in your service, right? Before you add any new feature plan how and when you will test it with the users. There are multiple of different research techniques like surveys, field studies, focus groups, so many to choose from that you can actually find one that is more suitable for your needs, for your budget, for your timeline. And if you can't go with tests with users, go with the desk research instead. So go through the industry reports, do your competition analysis, and see what are the new mobile solutions. All of those can give you a lot of insights to what to do next and where to go with your product. And when you gather all of this data, work smart with it, because prioritizing work into a roadmap can be a daunting job. And fortunately, there are multiple techniques, including Moscow or EIC model, that can help you to decide on what you should focus on first.
Okay. Maybe I can also add a few things. Like, even though this is a question for management, there are also a few things that developers may realize over time. Like they may even tell to the executives, like, if you start spending more time on per task in order to achieve that task, most likely you are having some kind of a technical debt, and it's much harder for you to produce a value with a given time. Also, over time you will see that frequency of updates may get lower, may reduce. That also means that you are producing less value over given time. Also, certain things can be picked up in regression tests, that in order to fix one problem, you therefore break another thing in the system. These things can be caught up in the regression tests. Also, as a developer, stereotypical developer, you will realize then the amount of coffee you drink per day. I personally try to drink 1 cup of coffee every morning, but sometimes it gets stressful and annoying that I switch to 2 or 3 cups a day, which is an indication for me that things are not going so well.
3 is a normal amount.
3 is normal.
Okay, the coffee. This brings me to performance. I think that it's quite a nice transition. So the issues with performance and stability can occur at any stage of the product lifecycle. But if you are a scale-up business, then you have definitely much to lose. Definitely more than if you're a startup. So my question would be, what performance issues are most common during the mobile scale-up phase, and what do these stem from?
Maybe I'll start from backwards, from the reasons. As your project grows and becomes huge in terms of, let's say, short description, that means there are too many things that can go wrong. That means there are too many things to process and display to the user. That exponentially increases the edge cases for you to deal with. Especially if your system has payment methods and deals with, let's say, different APIs, different third-party integrations, a lot of things can go wrong. Included with the lack of documentation, because if you, in a fast pace, develop something, you probably don't have much time to documentate everything that you do and system does in this case. That also can be aggravated with additional dependencies. More dependency you have in the system, less scalable it will get in my experience, because then as a whole, scaling up as a whole together with the dependencies will be harder, because all dependencies, previous ones may not support certain behavior, may not support certain, I don't know, even regions, different specific cases. Like a lot of things can go wrong. So you have to, like I said in the beginning, you have to pay special care what you're including in the system to make sure it's scalable enough and frequently updated and actual. And all these things are basically like under the hood of rushed development. So if you're rushing it, a lot of things are going wrong. So with the time pressure, you include a lot of bad practices. A lot of people does it. I'm not gonna say that we all work quite meticulously. If you're under pressure, you make mistakes.
Yeah, that's just the way it goes, right?
Yeah, exactly. And all these things basically most commonly lead to lengthy contents that your application basically load each time. That means starting an application takes much longer. Things that you scroll easily in the previous update, this time you wait 1 or 2 seconds in order for it to show something, or your application is taking much more resource, much more disk space, or consuming a lot of CPU power. These things can happen because you process more data. These are the most common things that I observe in these kind of apps.
And then users get frustrated, and there are more bad reviews, and
it's like a spiral, basically.
Yeah, and a never-ending story about performance. Yeah, so performance issues should not be left unattended. Period. But I guess there may be still some skeptics among our audience. But I believe there is at least one thing that will convince them it's worth taking care of the stability issues, and that's money and hard data on its loss.
Yeah, so exactly. So now we go to the usability actually, because the bad experience can damage your business a lot, right? You can create an app that is able to handle even 1 million users, but if you sacrifice the experience, it won't be enough to succeed, right? Because it's very hard to get users in the mobile industry, and it's very easy to lose them altogether. First of all, the competition is huge, and like popular apps rise and fall in a heartbeat, and we just see one name that is very popular right now, tomorrow everyone will forget about it. And those statistics are harsh. That's true. 99% of consumer apps actually fail on the market, and I think only 7% live longer than 3 months. So basically, you need to be sure that you prioritize your user and the quality to succeed in this hard environment. And it's because users are basically unforgiving. I think more than 50% claim that they won't give you another chance if they meet with bad experience in your app. So they remember the brand and they just won't trust you anymore. So can't stress it enough, prioritize quality, prioritize your users, and make sure that you create something that is important for them and works well.
So there will be no second chance in the mobile world?
Probably no.
Okay, all these numbers may sound quite scary, I guess. So what can we do to ensure that the performance and stability issues do not harm our mobile application as it grows? I know that I already asked you about the things that we can do at the launch stage when the app is still small, but I guess there are some measures and steps that we can take at the scale-up stage as well.
So it starts with a good design, of course, with mature process during the design phase. So if you create a design with performance and scalability in mind, that means that you create not only the designs, but also the good documentation for it. So let's say you create a style guide, changelog, or even a design system. Style guide is basically this living organism that you create alongside the designs that contains all of the components and atoms from little things like icons to huge ones like layouts, tables, and so on. And that lets developers to stay consistent, to standardize code to make it tidy and quick to load. Also, creating those repetitive components, optimizing styles, and using native assets will let you to, that will positively influence your performance of the app. And regarding the design system, apart from having the guidelines for the visuals, it also contains components libraries, which is basically a reusable code for the developers, so that also brings the app closer to consistency and better performance. That being said, and I think it's worth to mention here, creating a custom design system for your app is a quite expensive thing, but you don't have to do it, fortunately, almost never. It's for the bigger players. There are multiple of open source solutions, for example, material design, which is based on Flutter libraries. So you don't have to spend a lot of money to basically stay consistent.
That's definitely good news.
Yeah.
Okay. What about the code?
Of course, there are a lot of stuff that you can do, but I think I will start with our cooperation with the product design team. At the beginning of each project, we heavily cooperate together because this is the moment we create meaningful user flows. And that is because we are developers and we are living in our specific ways. So usually we tend to miss how things should work. So cooperating with the product design team, cooperating with a UX designer will help us seeing the big picture, how a regular user would expect things to work for us. Also, for us, having a consistent design, a very well crafted design is really helpful, because as an end result we also create reusable components, consistent widgets and visuals in the application, so it's a better performing app, and it's much easier for user to use this app, have a better user experience. There are also some processes that actually helps developers, therefore indirectly affects the performance of your application. For example, traditional thing, but giving a regular code review for whatever you're adding into the application, or peer programming sessions, or giving your developers some coding guidelines, like having them somehow more homogeneous experience with the coding, with the project that they are preparing. Also, clear acceptance criteria that doesn't let your developers to go wild with their decisions. So this is also important. Also, I think some amount of time dedicated for refactoring the existing system will also help your product to become better over time, because it's the case that I keep seeing. Developers see some mistakes and that's getting ignored, like, because there is no time to basically go and fix that. But if you provide them this time, this small slot that they can just go and fix that, they are more than happy to basically go ahead and do it. So I find it quite useful.
Because leaving it as it is will have its consequences.
Yes, and it's basically not visible until you address it. So giving it time, or at least creating a ticket in the backlog for that will definitely help.
So that sounds like the reasonable best practices to follow. It's pretty universal, but it will work in the mobile scaleup project.
I think so, yeah.
Okay. And now that you mentioned processes, I think we are ready to move on to the last topic, that's the mindset and team-related things. So as you said at the beginning, there are some tales of success that we've all heard of, but there are just as many, or I think even many more, of businesses that failed during the scale-up stage for whatever reasons. And how can we ensure that our organization is not one of them, and that we are actually ready to scale our mobile product?
So I would say that this product mindset is a must. So what you want to do is to focus on the business and end product instead of temporary challenges and milestones. So thinking more in terms of outcomes instead of the outputs. So measure those with metrics like retention and user adoption, and not with, I don't know, trends and things that you think are cool to code with. I'm sure Aydin understands that. So that's the idea, is to have the team, like business, design, development, infrastructure, QA, all of those to work as a one team from day one, so that they create the experience and the product together with their knowledge and experience. And the decisions you should be driven by the users and the business, and that's the core of the mindset, I think.
When it comes to product-based approach, I think it's also important, like I mentioned earlier, having a mobile strategy, either mobile first or mobile early, because that will lead you to tackle certain specific problems that's only for mobile applications early on, so that you won't postpone some potential issues that will prevent your application or project from scaling up.
Okay, and Kuba, you actually mentioned all members of the team working hand in hand. And we shouldn't forget really about these people behind the project and the processes. What skills, speaking from your own experience, should they possess to make a mobile scale-up project a success? Maybe we could start with designers.
Sure. So for sure you should look for people that are experienced in creating mobile experience, in particular, that know the common mobile patterns, that understands the characteristics of Android and iOS, and also the characteristics of the smartphones, their possibilities and limitations. I think people like that will work a little bit faster and more efficient. Addition to that, you should look for people that have this user-centric attitude, that are creative and focused on problem solving. People that are definitely product-oriented, as we mentioned, and that also requires from them high skills in teamwork. And last but not least, I would look for people that are good with documentation of their work, that work well with style guides, design systems, that create change logs, that prepare working files as tidy as possible, so that you can go back to them and reuse them if you need to. Basically, you need to find people that not only create pretty things, but also things that work.
Yeah, sounds reasonable.
Yeah.
And what about mobile developers?
There are a bunch of technical things that probably they will be quite different for different technologies that company is working on. But I would like to talk about a few like gentler things in this case that you can look for in a good developer, like of course the capability or capacity to tackling difficult problems. That's, I think, the base of being a developer. Having or at least practicing every day these main principles, solid principles, dry, or keeping things stupidly simple in this case. I can also recommend developers to swallow 5 books about design patterns. It might help in their later career. And I think it's also important if a developer cares about test coverage, which eventually saves a bunch of headache over longer periods of working in the same projects. What else? I think there are also some sort of soft skills that's soft or additional things to that, like communicating clearly and openly, talking about the facts, not like emotions. I'm not saying emotion doesn't have a space in that place, but if you talk about the product, then you have to talk about the facts and objective things. Knowledge of the platform. So if you are a cross-platform mobile developer, then you have to have the knowledge of knowing iOS, Android, or other things that you may potentially develop on, like native, how things natively work, because eventually you may need to integrate or at least develop something in the native, not like all the time in the cross-platform. And for mobile developers, it's also important about these design systems. Either it's material design or it's Apple human interface. Knowing those things is going to help, as well as knowledge of design tools like Figma most often used, because if you're cooperating with the designer, product design team, I'm guessing that most of the time they are just sending a Figma file just to, or at least sharing it. Correct me if I'm wrong.
They do share it, yeah.
They do share it. So ability to use this kind of tools without the need of help will definitely make their life easier. The developer also should care about the adaptiveness, because we talked about platforms and how they work. Knowledge about it is important, but caring about adaptiveness is also important, because that means you are also caring about providing a native-like or at least high-quality experience for your users. And additionally, I think this is the last one. They should be open for new challenges, not like stay in their own shell and just don't leave the comfort zone. It's also something for a plus.
Okay, so it sounds like it's all about cooperation and
teamwork.
Yeah, just trying to make each other's
just
life
not working
easier.
in silos, never.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I think it would be great if all the clients who are building mobile applications were able to hire great talent that you've just talked about. But sometimes it's not possible for whatever reasons. It can be the time restrictions, the budget limitations. It doesn't really matter. What I'm driving at is that in this case, you need to outsource. And it can go both ways, actually. And the trick to good outsourcing is, I believe, finding a good, reliable tech partner. Speaking from your own experience, what would you say makes a perfect tech partner for a mobile scale-up project?
I think you should look for a company that has mature, well-tested processes that are flexible enough, and that you can, or the company you find, will tailor them to your needs, but never at the cost of under-delivering, right? Good development process is a key for working in scale-up, for scale-up projects in scale-up environment, especially if you started with something that was maybe not perfect, right? And here at Merixstudio, we believe that one of the most important stages is discovery stage, which is a key to productive deep dive into the project, the client's needs, the vision, and so on. Yeah.
Okay.
I actually talked about processes a couple of questions ago, and I believe a product success is not about individual talents or very good single developer that does all. It's more about how your development team or how your development partner is basically providing you with the whole development process, basically. Speaking from my own experience, solid development process is about cooperating with the client, as well as taking responsibilities of the project. But this also doesn't mean that we develop product in our own way by ignoring what client is needing. But it's also about how we focus on development, how we manage the risk in the development. How do we ensure the quality basically with our QA processes? It's like a whole thing circling around the development team, product design team that a good, reliable development partner would provide you in this case.
So there is also a subject of the form of the cooperation. You can go with dedicated team or with the team augmentation model. If you decide to hire a dedicated team for a software house, like for example, from Merixstudio, right? It's basically creating this remote department that is built from a blend of qualified professionals from different fields. And what you can rely on, what you can count on is that they are focused on your product, they are focused on the problem, technical choices, and the scope of the project. And they can also take a lot of ownership for the decisions they made, which basically means that you will have this dedicated team that works well together. They have the experience to work together. That's also something that is an advantage of hiring a dedicated team from one company. The other model would be a team augmentation, which basically allows you to lend talented people and add them to your in-house team to work faster, to work better, or to work in technologies that you can't cover with your own team, right? The thing that is the most important, regardless the model you will choose, is to find a tech partner that will be reliable, that will have the ability to advise you and guide you through the whole process. And that's how we do it here in Merixstudio. Our teams are engaged, are present, are motivated, and this is something that pays off for our clients.
Mm-hmm. And I feel that one thing that we could add to the list of qualities that you just gave us is transparency in communication and processes. How about that?
From the development team's perspective, transparency is one of the crucial things, because daily basis almost daily basis, let's say, we are contacting client. We are including him in our process of development. So any kind of risk, any kind of potential problems that application may face in the future is directly conducted, basically reported to the client. So additional measures can be taken in this case. And I see a huge benefit in that, because everything is clear, and you don't really put additional pressure to hide or basically ignore certain things. And that means we are taking the ownership of the product, and then doing our best to give as realistic feedback, or as realistic screen display of the current status as possible with the development.
So I believe that we are slowly heading towards the end of this webinar, but I will have one more question to you guys. So imagine our audience can remember only two things from this entire hour of us talking. What would you like them to remember? Two things from the design and two things from the mobile development domain.
Mm-hmm. So from the design perspective, I would say those two takeaways would be: first, don't forget about your users. You think you know everything, you think you know what is the best for your app, but the truth is that what you should focus is what your users needs, what they know, and what they want. So don't be afraid to listen to them, to use your analytical tools, to conduct research, surveys, things like that, and ask them what they need and make your decisions based on that. And the second thing would be design with the scalability as a principle for the designers. So well thought out design will be based on good practices, common patterns, native solutions, and all of this will help you in the future when you will scale up, basically.
Mm-hmm. How about the development?
Actually, I wanted to talk about the same thing. Scalability mindset is quite crucial for developers. So have a scalability mindset whenever you develop things. And second of all would be open and don't hesitate taking initiative. That also includes talking about issues and risks in the project. And the reason is that you are the one that actually does all these things, and you know what's going on internally. So make sure you don't just put everything under the carpet, but openly talk about it, and don't hesitate being more, open for new challenges.
Mm-hmm. So these are great tips, and I believe we have a wrap, right? Thank you very much, guys, for talking us through the challenges of mobile scale-up and for accepting my invitation to this webinar. Thank you to our audience for sticking with us. If you have any questions about mobile development in general, or perhaps mobile scale-up, don't hesitate to reach out to us via email or via LinkedIn. We'll be happy to answer your questions. Also, don't forget to check out more of our mobile development related content. We have plenty of articles and videos about that on our Merixstudio's Insights. And I guess see you next time.